You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com.
And welcome on into Sox in the Basement, where normally it's a couple of guys sitting around a 9-foot homemade oak bar talking White Sox baseball. But, you know, sometimes things happen, and it's me, it's Ed. I'm here because, well, Chris and James Fox of Future Sox recorded a brilliant half-hour discussion about the upcoming MLB draft and the White Sox and what they're planning on doing with it. And then technical snafus happened while Chris was on his way to go to his lake house for the weekend. And so here I am, and I'm going to talk draft anyway. And speaking of drafts, Sox in the Basement brought to you by Cork and Kerry at the Park, 33rd and Princeton in the shadow of the ballpark. Just a fabulous selection of beers, wines, spirits, wonderful food, a great staff. It's a great place to hang out, watch a game while they're on the road. Heck, watch a game while they're in the stadium if you want to. Just have the camaraderie of fellow White Sox fans and enjoy talking about the 2005 team as they come up on the weekend where they're memorializing that and celebrating the 20th anniversary, or talk about your best memories of Bobby Jenks, may he rest in peace, or whatever you want to do, but do it at Cork and Kerry at the Park, 33rd and Princeton. Check them out at corkandkerry.com. We also have the Sox Nerd on today to talk about some stuff, but first, let's just dive into the draft. And let's talk a little bit about what happens here with Chris Getz and the draft. I'm not going to get into specifics about what I think they're going to do. I'm not going to get into specifics about what's been heard or anything like that. We'll recap everything really well next week after the draft, which happens this weekend. And what I want to talk about, though, is I want to talk about where the White Sox stand as far as the rebuild goes and how well they can rebuild through the draft, because it's not the simplest thing to do. Okay, building up a minor league system is something that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of energy, and development is key on all of that, because you can draft the biggest names, you can draft guys that are can't miss prospects, you can draft whoever the heck you want, but the reality is that you got to bring these guys along and turn them into actual baseball players, which is something that the White Sox historically didn't really do. Okay, Andrew Vaughn is an exact example of that, where he was not given enough time in the minor leagues really to hone his craft as a professional. He was a decorated hitter coming out of college. He was a surefire first rounder in the MLB draft. The fact that the White Sox got him was, in fact, it was a pick that was lauded. It was a pick that anybody who was a prospect hound sat there and went, hey, this is really good that the White Sox got this guy. He could be a staple bat for them for years to come. But alas, when they got him with the third overall pick in 2019, they had him in a truncated season that year, as you do. They had the COVID year that took him off. And then lo and behold, here he was, the savior of the White Sox, as he was coming up with what turned out to be a very rotten last core of young players that came up together. So it's not to say that you can't do it, but I think what we've seen that the core that is coming up now is basically here. Coulson Montgomery's arrival, along with Chase Meidroth, Kyle Teel, Edgar Caro. There's a few other guys that might be down there. There's pitching that's hanging around down there. But those are the big ones, right? Those are the big names. Those are the guys that were acquired by trade. Coulson Montgomery is the last of the first rounders that it was basically ready, because when you look back now, you've got the last three first rounders, Hagen Smith and Nolan Schultz. We know what they're doing right now. They're working their way up the system, but they're not quite ready to be here. And they're not going to be really an impact piece until they've had more time under their belt. And Getz has been doing a pretty good job of shielding them from rushing them to the majors. They were not given the Garrett Crochet treatment. They were not given the Chris Sale treatment of bring them up here, throw them in the bullpen, trial by fire, and then let's turn him into a starter and try and give him that workload. Worked out pretty well for Garrett Crochet, other than the injury. Worked out pretty well for Chris Sale. Could have worked for those two, but they're letting him figure it out in the minors. Okay, that's player development right there. Okay, that's a good thing. Jacob Gonzalez is the guy that's sandwiched in between those two, and he's a guy that is down in Double-A. He's hitting 247. He's not doing terrible, but he's not doing great, and he's not ready to come here. He's also now a guy that may or may not have a spot on the team, depending on how you feel about Coulson Montgomery as a shortstop, depending on how you feel about Coulson Montgomery as the third baseman, depending on how you feel about Chase Mydroth in the middle of your infield. And we saw in game one of a doubleheader, we saw Coulson Montgomery come in and play third base with Mydroth at short and Lenin Sosa at second. And it worked out pretty well. Now, that was necessitated by an injury to Tim Elko and whatever is going on there. The White Sox will certainly deal with it, and they've got a few injuries going on. So that became an interesting infield combination in and of itself. But Gonzalez is a guy that is going to have to supplant somebody there, whether it's Lenin Sosa, who Chris and I have talked about repeatedly, being somebody that you're not going to be able to necessarily rely on as a second baseman because of his lack of defensive prowess. But he's a guy that might be a valuable bat, and he might not be enough of a bat to warrant being a DH full-time, so he's kind of a tweener. So you could sit there and say, okay, well, Gonzalez, if he's better defensively, maybe he does that, and maybe you see this alignment with Coulson Montgomery, with Chase Mydroth, then with Jacob Gonzalez, whether Mydroth or Gonzalez are playing short or second, would remain to be seen. But that's really about it. And so the question becomes, what do the White Sox do well here? And has Getz really made any changes to what used to happen under the Hahn and Kenny Williams regime? Because you can go back through the White Sox draft history, all right? And it's a lengthy draft history because they've been around a long time. But going back to 2017, which is when Chris Getz becomes a part of the front office, the first-round picks, Jake Berger, who has been a mixed bag in the major leagues, honestly. When he came up here, he was probably the White Sox best chance at having a real power hitter. He had a nice run down in Miami after he got traded away from the White Sox. It's been a bit of a struggle for him with Texas this year, although he's always been a second-half guy. So the jury's still kind of out on Jake Berger, but he also overcame a myriad of injuries, and it's just a wonderful story. And the fact that he's in the majors at all is actually pretty brilliant. Nick Madrigal, it's a sad story. Nick Madrigal was probably a first-round talent physically, but not a first-round talent mentally. At least that's the rap that's been on him. And certainly he didn't put in the effort to try and keep himself healthy. Andrew Vaughn, we just talked about. Garrett Crochet comes along in 2020, and he is rushed to the major leagues, basically. He's right there. Coulson Montgomery just arrived. And then, as I said, Schultz, Gonzalez, and Smith. So that's all the first-rounders that Chris Getz has been a part of. And if you look and forgive the rushing up there of Berger, not being rushed, but the rushing up there of Nick Madrigal, who shows up, he's drafted in 2018. By 2020, he's in the conversation. Andrew Vaughn, who basically gets no minor league time. Garrett Crochet, who skips it completely. And then Coulson Montgomery's had a significant run. It's just that Coulson Montgomery's an interesting one because his development has been really stunted. He started out well, and then he's continually gotten worse. And then even in Charlotte this year, it's been so up and down to where he had to go to Arizona. And I don't know how many times we have to hear about his diary, to make sure that he keeps his feelings and his desires and wants in check, or the new mental approaches and things like that. That's all great as long as it turns into production on the field in something other than his defensive abilities. So he might have been rushed. It's possible that Chris Getz is falling into that same old pattern and that same old, what do we do with this? Okay. I'm more interested to see going forward if the White Sox not only can be patient with players, but if they have the ability then to maximize what happens with these guys. I'm also curious to see when they draft this year, because the scuttlebutt around it is they're probably looking at younger guys, high school guys, longer-term projects to try and sustain a wave after wave of prospects. And there's going to be something of a gap here because, like I said, the tank is pretty much empty right now. And at least from the standpoint of your first-round picks, you kind of know where they are. The second round picks aren't much better of a bag, right? You've got Caleb Bonnemer, who's still young, Blake Larson, who's young. Those are Getz picks in the second round from last year. Grant Taylor is here. Now, he's been rushed up here, but Grant Taylor also looks the part. And I think pitchers, you can kind of get away with it a little bit. Peyton Pallette looks like he is going to be good. Wes Kath hasn't panned out the way they wanted him to. Jared Kelly never panned out the way they wanted him to. Matt Thompson, Steele Walker, and then Gavin Sheets was the 2017 second rounder. And Gavin Sheets, of course, disappointment for the White Sox, doing much better in a much better lineup for the San Diego Padres, but also kind of slowing down a little bit as the year goes on. Sheets, I don't think, was rushed, okay, but he's a 4-year guy from Wake Forest. Steele Walker was traded, never really amounted to anything. The other guys, the pitchers, they don't always work out, right? And that's true. Wes Kath is still a guy that's, well, he's still a guy, right? He still exists. He's at Winston-Salem. He has not moved up in 3 years. And he's hitting 186 this year, okay? So when you're looking at second-round picks, it's just not there. The development isn't there. It's not happening for some of these guys. And that, I think, is more than anything is going to be the key going forward. And if you need to stick your key in something going forward because you need a new exterior door, exterior window, something to spruce up the outside of your house, keep the heat out and the cool air in this hot summer, check them out at Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. They've been in business for 40 years. The owners are always there on site doing the jobs, always there on site in the showroom showing you everything. It's not pressured sitting in your kitchen, and it is not farmed out to just whoever the heck feels like installing a door or a window. They have all their own employees. They are hands-on, and it is a fantastic experience. They're helping Chris out right now with a broken window, and it's going very, very well for him. I know that for a fact. And you can check them out at their showroom, 6820 159th Street in Oak Forest, or you can always check them out at windowdooroakforest.com. But now back to the idea of what happens, and are they actually developing players here on the south side of Chicago? Looking at the third-round picks, looking at this history. Nick McLean last year, Seth Keener the year before. Jonathan Cannon we've seen, and he's actually doing quite decently here in the major leagues. He's been a little inconsistent, but overall you like his stuff, you like the makeup. He looks like a guy that is going to be part of the rotation going forward anyway. Sean Burke, same thing. He's here. He's struggled a little bit more than Cannon. Cannon had the injuries, but I think Burke could figure it out still. He's a guy that's still a candidate to do something and turn it around and stick around here. Addison Coffey he's a reliever out there in the minors. Andrew Dahlquist, Connor Pilkington ended up getting traded away, and Luis Gonzalez, an outfielder. And if you're starting to sit here and go, I don't really know much about these guys, it's okay, because the further and deeper we go, the less likely you are to have heard a buzz around these guys, and the less likely it is that you've heard, hey, casually at least, this is a guy I should be paying attention to. Going into the fourth round, Casey Salk last year, Calvin Harris the year before, Jordan Sprinkle, Brooks Goswine, Cade Michaels, James Beard, Lency Delgado, Lincoln Hertzman. You're starting to get into guys that are questionable. And the deeper we go, if we get into the fifth round, you're going to start recognizing names like George Wolkow, who is really just notable because he's a gigantic man, right? And that's what we know about him. Huge power. What are they doing to get stuff out of the fourth rounders, the fifth rounders? This has long been a thing that I have had a problem with the White Sox. And Chris Getz, as the director of player development, is kind of responsible for where they sit with this, right? How many of these guys are going to make an impact? How many of these guys are going to make it up here? You're not going to hit on all these prospects by a long shot. And like I said, other fifth rounders, Tyler Schweitzer is a guy that James Fox has mentioned on this show as being somebody that to watch. Tanner McDougal, you may have heard that name. Bailey Horn got traded to the Cubs. Dan Metzdorf is I don't know anything about him, admittedly. Jonathan Stever we saw briefly until injuries completely derailed him. Tyler Johnson never really panned out the way they wanted him to. And then last year, Sam Antonacci, the year before, Christian Opor. We can go in even deeper because obviously we can get into the sixth round, seventh round. But the deeper you go, the less likely you are to have recognized any of these names. The less likely you are, unless you're a real prospect head, to be sitting there going, yeah, that's the future. right? But that's what the White Sox need. They need the future not to be just the first rounders. They need the future not to be just the second rounders. They need the future to be a fourth rounder, a fifth rounder, a sixth rounder, okay? Jonathan Cannon making it up here is a good thing, right? Grant Taylor being converted into a closer and making it up here right after, maybe it is and maybe it isn't, right? Because you do wonder if he got more time down in the minors, how would he have fared going forward? But that said, again, sometimes you just look at it and you go, yeah, but that guy's going to be a stud. He's going to be really important to this team at some point. And it's not like he couldn't make that transition and go back to being a starter. But if he wants to remain a lights-out reliever, I think everybody's okay with that as well. The other thing you're going to notice, though, is that of all the names I've read off, and if you go and look at this, there's a lot of pitchers that have been drafted. That's where Getz and the White Sox, and even in the prior regime, that's where they seem to be focusing a lot of their attention on in the draft, is arms. And the dearth of position players is starting to bite them, because when we look at what they're going to have after the trade deadline this year, all right, if we look at what's going to happen if Luis Robert Jr., Mike Tauchman, Andrew Benintendi, and Michael Taylor all get traded, you'll have Brooks Baldwin out there because his back injury is probably not bad enough to keep him out long term. You'll have, who else? Will Robertson, the guy they just picked up from the Blue Jays. His stats look nice. What you see in the stories, what he's doing at AAA this year. He's got the high on-base percentage that they really like. And at his career minor league numbers, he's got an on-base percentage of .333, although the batting line isn't all that great, and the slugging percentage isn't all that great. He's 27 years old. He's not really a prospect. He's a flyer, right? And the guy they picked up for Matt Thaiss is the same thing. He's fast, but he's not really a prospect. They kind of took a flyer. They're not going to be able to trade all of their outfielders by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not going to happen. But the question is, what are they going to do next year in that position? Are they going to hold on to Mike Tauchman? They got him for another year, and they go with an outfield of Tauchman and Brooks Baldwin and insert player here. Okay? That's a possibility. They could do that. But they're going to have to fill in around that because no one's coming. George Wolkow's not going to be here anytime soon. He's just not. He's far away. Yes, he's a name that everybody's watching. He's a man of great stature that everybody's watching. But the position players aren't there. Jacob Gonzalez, if he's the next guy up in terms of the high draft picks, in terms of the guys that you're really looking at and saying, hey, this is a guy that we're trying to build around for the future, he's a middle infielder. He would have to be converted, or Miguel Vargas would have to be converted back to an outfielder. He did play left field for the White Sox and for the Dodgers. But I don't know if they want to do that, okay? And you can hold on to Andrew Benintendi. You've got him for a few more years. I don't know if they want to do that either. I don't know if he's in their plans. So the question becomes, what's next? And it's not going to be from this draft. There's not going to be any immediate answers. The White Sox for too many years had a football mentality under Kenny Williams. And that's a problem because the football mentality is, in the NFL, the rookies you draft, your first 5 draft picks, all have an opportunity to contribute. When you start getting into the 6th and 7th round of the NFL draft, now you're taking flyers. Now it's specialists, right? If a 7th round pick is going to contribute, it's going to be on special teams. 7th round picks aren't going to contribute right away to a Major League Baseball team. It's just not how it works. Not how it ever worked. So there's nothing close. There's a lot that might be far away. This is either going to be a waste of the current crop and the current core, or it's going to be something where that money from Justin Ishbia is going to have to come into play, or that ability for Chris Getz to find diamonds in the rough is going to have to come into play, or when he turns around and makes trades, what he's going to have to do is he's going to have to get guys on the verge, whether they are the better prospect available or not, because I don't think the White Sox can afford to spend too much capital on guys that are in A-ball and are years away. They just don't have it, all right? And there's going to be more discussion about that, I'm sure, after the draft and figuring out where they really are, okay? And after the trade deadline, where are they really? That's what's going to be the key. And that's really all there is to it. Right now, enjoy what you're seeing out of Coulson Montgomery. Enjoy what you're seeing out of Edgar Caro and Kyle Teal. Enjoy what you're seeing out of Chase Mydroth. And root for Miguel Vargas to turn it back around. Root for Tim Elko to turn into something, right? Root for him to show the power in the majors and the batting prowess that he showed at AAA this year. But at the same time, just hope that they do something to turn this around. And honestly, if you need to take your mind off the White Sox future, let's just listen to what the Sox Nerd has to say about the present and the past. Sox Nerd brought to you, of course, by Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history? Great eats and drinks, green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont, where you can shop, you can dine, you can drink, you can explore, you can just hang out with all your family and friends. Check out their website for the latest info and listen to, of course, Lamont Unlocked here on the broadcast basement. But visit lamontdowntown.com for all the information. Nerd, what do you got?
A few words, Sox Nerd style, on the late Bobby Jenks, who succumbed to cancer on July 4th. A Jenks appearance, especially in 2005 and 2006, was an event. With his entrance song Boom by P.O.D. blaring as he trotted in from the bullpen, Jenks and the Sox were among the first in creating the closer moment. San Diego was doing the same thing with Trevor Hoffman and Hell's Bells around that time. Now it's the norm around the league. The last Sox closer with a consistent entrance spectacle was Liam Hendriks. Hopefully the Sox can get back to that soon, and Grant Taylor certainly looks like he's on track to be a closer worth hyping. Jenks threw 100 before everyone was doing it, and that blazer helped carry the Sox to the 05 title. His strikeout of future Hall of Famer Jeff Bagwell to end the 8th inning in Game 1 of the 2005 World Series is still one of my favorite moments in Sox history. That was just one of the many consequential outs Jenks secured. He also nailed down division clinchers in 2005 and 2008, Games 2 and 3 of the 05 ALDS, and of course, Game 4 of the 05 World Series. The hefty Jenks became a national sensation in 2005 when manager Ozzie Guillen summoned him from the bullpen using a wide signal. Believe it or not, that was not the first time a Sox manager used the wide or fat signal to call for a reliever. It was, however, the first time it was done in jest or out of necessity. Before there was Bobby Jenks, there was Max Surkant. The portly, by standards of the day, Surkant, like Jenks, was once summoned from the bullpen by a manager using the wide sign. Surkant, listed by BaseballReference.com at 6'1", 195 pounds, led the 1949 Sox with 49 appearances. While Guillen affectionately used the signal to ID Jenks in the 05 World Series, there was no jolliness attached to Surkant's beef. Quote, Sox relief Surkant and his appetite, blared the Tribune headline of February 5th, 1950, in recapping Surkant's demotion to the minors. The Trib reported Surkant's, quote, tendency toward heft not only handicapped the right-hander, but sometimes was a source of family embarrassment, according to accounts. One such source was manager Jack Onslow using the, quote, fat signal to bring in Surkant from the pen. Surkant asked for a halt to the practice because it offended his wife. Said the Trib, quote, the situation, however, did not cause Max to stay away from the chuck wagon, and that's the main reason he departed. The 27-year-old Surkant was 3-5 with a 4.78 ERA for the 1949 Sox, wearing number 16, the number Ted Lyons made famous. When Surkant was shipped to Sacramento after that season, he was never seen by the Sox again. Happily, the same can't be said for the fat signal. Before I get to my zinger, I remind you that gems like these and long-form pieces are on my blog, which you can link to at soxinthebasement.com. My zinger, in honor of the 20th anniversary of the World Champions, I'm going to zing frequently about that team, throwing out some gems you may not know about the 2005 Sox. The future champs sent 4 reps to the All-Star game: Burley, Garland, Konerko, and Podsednik. That was the most since 1975 when Cott, Orta, Gossage, and Dent represented the Sox. Probably more than you wanted to know about Big Bad Bobby Jenks, Max Sircon, and the Fat Signal, and thank you for indulging me in one of my favorite White Sox research finds.
So headed into the bottom of the ninth of this particular episode, let's talk a little bit more about player development at the major league level, because that's the last aspect of this. And something I think the Sox have done better this year. Coulson Montgomery is going to learn on the job here, and he was being protected for a moment by Will Venable against left-handed pitchers. He didn't start against Logan Taylor Allen. He did not start against the lefty the game prior. It's 2 games in a row he'd been held out against left-handers. He only comes in and faces Allen against the Guardians because of the Tim Elko injury, and he doesn't do anything with it. Now, he's not hitting lefties particularly well. So the question becomes, and Chris and I had a little bit of a back and forth over text about this when we were realizing that I needed to cover the show myself. But one of the things that occurs to me is, on one hand, you sit there and you go, oh my God, Coulson Montgomery's a platoon player. And on the other hand, you sit there and go, oh my God, Coulson Montgomery's been a head case his entire season up until this point. He had to go down to Arizona and work with Ryan Fuller. He had to get himself right mentally, because that seemed to be the problem more than physical adjustments or whatever. Why on earth would you let a guy whose confidence is apparently hanging by a wire, and it's the wire holding together his journal, why on earth would you let this guy flail away at lefties if that's something he's going to struggle with? Get his feet wet against the right-handers and let him go. Kyle Teal, he's faced lefties as well, but he was also being protected to a certain degree against him. And you don't necessarily see the White Sox with an opportunity to completely protect all of their prospects. But right-handed batters don't have it as easy anyway, because there's far more right-handed pitching in the majors than there is left-handed pitching. But we've seen this in the past with them, and you started to wonder, was Gavin Sheets ever going to be an everyday player, or should they have platooned him more strictly, right? Andrew Vaughn became a guy who very obviously was having a difficulty with right-handers and was able to mash lefties. The eyeball test tells you that. I don't even have to pull the stats up. But I like the fact that they're trying to protect Coulson Montgomery against something that's more difficult, which is a major league left-hander, and give him an opportunity to try and find his way against right-handed pitching. I'm for that, because I think that they need to do this. I'm not for their development with the 2 catchers, because we have talked about it repeatedly on this show, about how Teal and Caro both need regular at-bats, and flip-flopping them in the order, 1 day on or 2 days on and 1 day off, 2 days off, isn't helping them grow. It isn't helping them get into a rhythm at the plate. It isn't helping them get into a rhythm behind the plate. It's not helping them become better catchers. It's not helping them become better hitters. And at some point, the White Sox, in order to develop those 2, are going to have to make a decision what they want to do, because the Teal-Caro 2-headed monster, if you really believe these guys are everyday players and are important parts of your lineup, and Edgar Caro hitting cleanup will tell you that, then you've got to figure out a way to get them in there every single day. And the same is going to be true for managing their workload, because one of the things that happened right before the All-Star break here is that Shane Smith went 3 innings in a start. And he was pulled, not because he was hurt, not because he was terribly ineffective, although he did give up a couple of homers, but he was pulled because they're getting to a point where they have to start managing his workload. And the same is going to be true of Hagen Smith and Noah Schultz down in the minors. They're going to have to start managing the pitcher's workload. At some point, Grant Taylor, they're going to have to manage his workload. Having 2-inning saves isn't going to happen, and having him pitch a lot of back-to-back games isn't going to happen. So the development is going to be interesting to see how they do that. How well do they rest the pitchers? How well do they manage their workload? How well are they able to get these players going, these position players going, and protect them against things that are going to hurt their confidence, but still expose them to enough to make it worthwhile for them to actually develop? There's a lot of things in play here that are very, very important. And they're not going to win a whole lot of ball games doing this, but the return from the trade deadline is going to be huge in that regard. In trying to figure out what the White Sox can do just to help develop these guys and what they can get back, because the draft, for as important as that is to the White Sox future, is not going to bring them anything at all, any help at all for years if they do this right.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.